a round of applause to Ken and the team who's helping to support Infra Day. I think it's going really well today. Well, so this panel is covering urban mobility and rethinking the future of transportation. And I just wanted to see if a raise of hands for anyone that may have used the light rail or scooted or biked or took rideshare today. A few, I see. All right. So these are just a couple of the things that we're thinking about in that future of mobility. I'm Andre McCarthy, transportation analyst at Brundle Group, which is an engineering and planning firm with a mission to accelerate equitable solutions to the climate crisis with offices in Fort Collins and Denver. So before we get started, I'll just kind of frame a little bit, and then I'll hand it over to our panelists who will introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some of the projects and topics and ideas that they're thinking about. So transportation, I think when we think about it, the purpose is to move people and goods from point A to point B. And we want that to be efficient and safe. And so cities, as they're growing, especially along the Front Range here, have to think about kind of those changing dynamics and how do you keep it efficient, how do you keep it safe, and kind of mitigating congestion, delays, unhealthy air, and kind of those unsafe opportunities that happen. But I think you might notice that we're in kind of a revolution for mobility options, I guess, over personal vehicles. So thinking about those biking, walking, scooters, micro-mobility in general, transit, light rail, buses. And so just kind of thinking about all these different options, thinking about how we're electrifying those as well. We heard a little bit earlier in the day about EV infrastructure. And then we also heard a little bit from Jay Decker from Denver about how they're building infrastructure, where they're building infrastructure for scooters and kind of that safe pathways. So I'll hand it over to our panelists now to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we'll get into a little bit more about mobility in urban areas.
There we go. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Thorne with the Colorado Energy Office, and I just manage a lot of e-bike programs for the state.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan Willett. I am a transportation capital projects manager with the city of Fort Collins, and thanks for testing the mic out there.
Likewise, I guess 3 for 3. Michael Koslow. I'm a civil engineering project manager with the city of Boulder, and I work in the transportation mobility group on capital projects related to traffic signals, bikes, transit, any what have you, transportation within Boulder.
Great, and just to start us off, I might ask, what gets you most excited about urban mobility and kind of the changes that are happening in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think you already kind of framed it a little bit. Like, just there's so many changes, and I'm really excited just to see all these other modes kind of coming online. Micromobility is an amazing option for people who maybe can't afford a car and then also have the added benefit of greenhouse gas reduction.
Yeah, I'm really excited that I feel like here in the United States, we're actually starting to get some traction. There's a lot of places around the world that have done a very good job with addressing urban mobility in a non-car centric way. And I think that our time is here perhaps, so yeah.
I think for me, if anyone can imagine this picture of 400 people in an individual car and then 400 people in a couple of buses and then 400 people walking, you can imagine immediately the impact of being able to have different modes of transportation. And personally, when I get up, try to get motivated, that's the picture that I have.
Great. I guess to get started, to talk a little bit about projects and programs and kind of the topics that are coming to the top of mind for folks in transportation. Dylan, I guess I'll start with you here can you tell us a little bit about the Linden Street renovation project that's creating a convertible street? Can you describe what that is, what that means, how that works, and then also the stakeholder engagement process that happened through that and how that's may have impacted the approach to discuss urban mobility with folks?
Yeah, definitely. So the Linden Street renovation project was completed in fall of 2022, so last year, a little bit later than this time. And I was the project manager on that. And basically, the Linden Street project, uh, you're familiar with, pedestrian malls, plazas, that sort of deal. Linden Street is a convertible street, so it's all at grade. We took everything out from building face to building face and put in concrete pavers all the way across, redid all the stormwater infrastructure, put in new planters, new lighting, and just really reimagined the entire space. And what that space did is it connected Old Town and Fort Collins with redeveloping the River District, which is just kind of to the northeast of Old Town. Historically, that had been kind of separated by a railroad, and it was just kind of it was a typical downtown corridor before the renovation. And I think that one of the big things with that project was really, we're talking about stakeholder engagement and public engagement and public education. It was nonstop. Every time I was down there, people would ask me, what's going on here? We had a fine street before it was functioning. Why are we spending money on this project? And I think that explaining, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Dutch concept of Woonerf, is what the street was kind of built around, which is a living street. Is really to activate that space, and it creates, a synergy between the tenants that live there, the business owners, the restaurants, the offices. So cars are still able to come into the street, but it really has a pedestrian and multimodal bike, scooters, whatever you want to ride down it. It feels comfortable, and yeah, the convertible aspect is that you can shut it down for events, and it basically becomes an extension of the Old Town Square Plaza. So that's the convertible aspect of it.
Great. Michael, I'll ask this one of you next. I think the City of Boulder has been working on improving mobility options while also achieving climate goals. Can you tell us a little bit about the core arterial network in Boulder and some of the efforts that are happening as part of it?
Sure, thanks. So if you think about who would ride a bike on a freeway? Like, probably nobody, right? But who would ride a bike on a cul-de-sac? Probably anybody be comfortable with that. And so what Boulder did that led up to the core arterial network, it's basically two different plans: our bike plan and our Vision Zero plan. So the bike plan is basically saying, hey, what's the right type of bike facility for that type of a road? A busier road might need a separation. A not as busy road could just be a striped bike lane. And so Boulder developed what's called a low stress walk and bike network in 2019. And then in 2020, our Vision Zero plan, which just in real quick layman's terms, we're moving towards zero crashes. And so we've identified where all the crashes around Boulder and where would be safety improvements need to be. And that's on a high injury network. So we've merged the high injury network and the bike network. And in 2022, early 2022, the Boulder City Council basically said, hey, these core arterial network projects need to be advanced. And so since then, there are about 5 or 6 arterial streets in Boulder, and each one of them is segmented into different phases and so forth. But right now we have a few in construction that were just kind of rebranded as they're in the core arterial network. We have a number that are in design and some that are still being studied. Hey, what would be the right fit given the inevitable trade-offs with parking, with vehicle capacity that might be necessary to be able to build alternative ways to get around town. So the core arterial network has a series of projects, and very happy to say I can talk up and down about one of them, but that's the general network, and I'll be working on that for hopefully many years.
Wonderful. And then Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about the state's upcoming e-bike programs? There is the e-bike grant program available to nonprofit organizations, local governments, tribal governments, and other community-based organizations to create e-bike programs that give e-bikes to low and moderate income Coloradans. And then there's the e-bike rebate program available to low and moderate income Coloradans. which some people may be familiar with some of the Denver EBike rebate program as well.
Yeah, so you guys have talked a little bit about like the infrastructure side, but also equally important is making sure people have access to the actual vehicles themselves. So we have designed a number of programs to offset the cost of an e-bike for low and moderate income Coloradans. So one of our big ones is a grant program, and we made this last year, we awarded about $1 million in funding. It's funding 8 projects around the state in communities large and small, rural and urban, and they basically give e-bikes to people. With that e-bike comes accessories, so they got helmets, locks, floor pumps, they got education and training on how to do bike maintenance and bike safety, and they have, in exchange, they collect data for us on how they use their bike. So we are getting some amazing data showing us that people are, in fact, transitioning from driving to biking, which is great for the environment. It's great. I mean, there's a number of reasons. And there's an off-cited statistic that most Americans travel on their trips 10 miles or less. This is a very easily accomplishable distance on an e-bike. So it's great that we have this program, but $1 million only gets us so far. There's only about 330 e-bikes. So really scaling up, we're launching an e-bike rebate program. We'll be the largest and first in the nation to do this. So it's starting in 2 weeks, very eagerly anticipated by Colorado residents, but coming out soon, and it'll just really offset that cost.
Great, and is that similar in kind of how the community grant program works, or is that going to be like a separate system for folks?
So it's a separate application process. We'll have a pretty short application for rebate applications up on our website. It's a point of sale discount, which we found is going to be essential for the population that will qualify for this program. Asking them to front the money for a $2,000, $3,000 e-bike and then waiting for a reimbursement check from the government, which we all know would take a long time. We found that probably wasn't the best way to go about it. So we're doing a point of sale discount, and they just have to apply ahead of time.
Great. So yeah, thinking about the infrastructure piece, thinking about the vehicle aspect to it, kind of looking at other infrastructure pieces, and this kind of goes into that bike and pedestrian improvement. But Dylan, would you be able to tell us about the Laporte Corridor pedestrian and bike improvement? What were the issues being addressed through that, and how has that, what were the improvements, and how was the community involved as part of that project?
Yeah, so the Laporte Corridor is on the northwestern part of Fort Collins, running east-west. And essentially, this was a county road where, houses and different schools and whatnot have kind of just grown around it over time. And Poudre School District actually has a major facility up there, and this is like one of the main corridors for students making their way to a high school too. So there's high school, Poudre School District. We also had a couple of deficient bridges that we needed to replace as well. So with all of our new projects in Fort Collins, we're including more upgraded bike facilities, bus facilities, trying to include all of those things. So with this project, we were looking at some serious safety concerns. There had been a fatal accident on that corridor. I think it was within the last 5 years or so, but there was a student that was struck. And so basically trying to make a safe route to school. So trying to get all these kids to school and trying to get people, there's a heavy residential area to the west, basically into the center of Fort Collins. And we built elevated bikeways and sidewalks and bus stops. And there's some nice crossings as well in there. Some of them with the RRFB included, but others are just a median refuge island. I've had comments out there, so this project is currently under construction, and citizens have come out and they've said, "Where'd the street go? there's only about 20 feet of street width in a lot of portions of this project, and there's about the same amount of sidewalk and bikeway width as there is street. So I think that, again, like talking about the education and just trying to inform the public, hey, this is going to dramatically improve safety. It's going to not only be better for automobiles, because you're going to get some modal shift. You're going to see people riding bikes more. It's going to be better in essentially every way. I could go on about all of the benefits and talking about maintenance and funding and all of that, but we don't have quite the time for that. But really, I think the big picture with a lot of these projects is reassessing our metrics and the way we define success with these projects. For so long we've looked at level of service, how many vehicles we can get through a corridor at a given time as the number one driver for success. But we're looking at safety, we're looking at multimodal level of service, different aspects like that. And I think that when we change that, we flip the script on that a little bit, and we're going to see some serious benefits in the long run.
Great. If we have time, I may come back to that financing and maintenance question there, because I think that's an important piece too. What I'll go to next is Michael talking a little bit about how earlier in the day, talking about EV infrastructure and just kind of what the demands are for that. I know the city of Boulder has some local requirements about including EV charging, but is this adding or changing to the mobility needs and demands, either around curbside or streets, or just how are you thinking about that?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So, as a capital projects engineer, I'm pivoting a little bit on the policy side. That part is a little bit not my bailiwick, but in general, Boulder has a requirement that any development, whether capital project or new development, depending on the footprint of that development, will need to have EV charging stations included in the development project or in the program. Like, say we're building a fire station or a school or something like that. In terms of the EV, the impact on the curbside, it's one component among a series of things that the city would need to manage, especially in a high demand, like a downtown type area. And I did look this up because I've been curious about how much EVs there are. Colorado has about 10.6% of the registered vehicles in 2022 are EVs. So it is becoming more of a fleet. And obviously, that's the goal that we're moving towards as we move forward. They operate really similar to a gas-powered vehicle in terms, though, of like how their impact on the curb. And would just kind of say Boulder's lucky that we're a smaller town and don't have as much of the demand as, say, a downtown Denver. But like there are considerations for, you've got folks that need to maintain the utilities. Might have heard something about fiber optic networks coming. A lot of people riding their bikes, scooters, loading. Businesses need to be able to access their businesses. So managing that curbside it's an art more than a science, I would say. And the folks that have to do it, my hat's off to them. But in general, you need to be able to consider all those different types of demands at the curb, and that's kind of what we're generally doing. So specific to Boulder, two of the tools we've employed recently in an update to our design and construction standards include floating bus islands. And what that is let's say they have them on 18th Street here in Denver. Let's say you have a bike lane that's separated from the car lane. Well, what happens when you get to the bus stop? In a floating bus stop, the bus stops are actually next to the vehicle lanes, and the bikes go around them, as opposed to the bikes and the buses having to be in conflict. And that's one of the types of features we'd like to see on the streets in future developments in Boulder, where there's those heavy connections between people using the bus and people that are trying to bike around them. And another one would be, you all have seen these bulb outs or curb extensions, and what those will do is take that distance someone would need to be able to walk across a really busy street and reduce that. It also makes that person getting ready to go across the street much more visible to a vehicle. So those are kind of some of the tools that we're recently employing that are very low tech, but thought it would share about how to manage that curbside, which is pretty busy.
It's definitely very busy, and I think you even brought up some of the loading docks and So when we're thinking about transportation, we're thinking moving people, but we're also thinking about moving goods and services and making those available. So then, Sarah, my question to you is kind of focused on kind of not only the people that we're moving, but around the goods and the fleets using that. The state, I think, is also addressing this kind of with the short and medium length delivery fleet trips through the state's e-cargo bike commercial delivery pilot program. Would you be able to speak a little bit about what that program is and how that's working?
Yeah, so we have a new program at the state. It stemmed out of a study that happened, I think the year before last, about what were some other ways that we could convert vehicle miles to bike miles. So one of the things that came out of that was an e-cargo delivery pilot program. So we literally just launched it, and I just made those awards about 3 weeks ago. So they have not even received their bikes yet. But the intent behind this program is, like it sounds, to convert those vehicle miles that would be used for short and medium length delivery trips to an e-cargo bike over a delivery box truck. So we kind of designed it that projects could submit an idea, and we're basically willing to try anything to see what's going to work. So I have a couple of police departments that are participating, and they're converting some of their patrol vehicles to e-cargo bikes. And I also have a couple of projects that one is an e-cargo bike library. So people that participate in the gig economy can check out an e-cargo bike and then use that to deliver for DoorDash or Uber Eats. So that's pretty exciting. A lot of those trips tend to be pretty short, so it's a pretty good use, I think, of e-cargo bikes. And overall, we're just trying to see what we can do. Ultimately, I think we would love to do some last mile deliveries from some of the bigger companies like your Amazons or UPSs, FedEx. We haven't seen any interest from them yet, but hopefully in the next round, we'll have some interest from them. Works particularly well in urban corridors. So we'll be running this program for about the next 5 or 6 years. So we're hoping that kind of we'll see some good data come out of that and some really good greenhouse gas emissions saved.
That sounds excellent. I'm excited to hear how those projects are going and who takes that on. I think we do have a few extra minutes here, so I might ask this question that was alluded to earlier about a big part of the infrastructure is not just about kind of getting that infrastructure built, but then it's about maintaining it and how to pay for that maintenance and keeping it operational. In some cases, the capital costs may be part of a grant program. And then kind of thinking about the operations and maintenance is not part of that program. So I wondered, Dylan, since you brought that up, if you had any thoughts about how you're thinking about that in a more holistic view.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the times when we're developing our capital projects, we're looking at the maintenance and we're discussing with our parks department or our streets department, and they're looking at 10, 20 years of maintenance and what that's going to cost them. And essentially, when we're looking at these projects that emphasize multimodal transit options, a lot of the time they get stuck. They're like, oh, this is going to be hard to take care of for snow removal, or this is going to be a challenge in this way or that way. But when you kind of redistribute that maintenance budget and look at it in the long term, the life cycle cost analysis of a lot of these projects, these simple solutions that we're talking about, are actually a lot cheaper than trying to maintain 60 feet sections of roadway. You have maybe you have a median swale, you have bike paths that aren't going to need to be replaced as frequently as your roadway section. So I think on a holistic picture, you can really look at the maintenance aspect and kind of bring that cost down. And if there are things that need to be included in the capital expenses for a project, like our parks department keeps talking about snow removal, and so does our streets department. And like you guys, that happens a dozen times a year. It shouldn't be a reason that we don't do a project. So what do we need to do? Do we need to buy you a new snowplow that can fit into the bike lanes? Because we can do that. It's these are simple solutions. I think that people just get really caught up trying to say why we can't do a project and rather why what we can do to make it happen. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add.
Michael?
Yeah, I would just throw in, having been former employee here at the city of Denver, that at 18th Street, there were some lovely floating bus stops put in a number of years ago, which are super helpful in mitigating the bus and bike traffic down 18th Street. When they were installed, the city traffic engineer and a number of area engineers were out personally shoveling those platforms because there wasn't a maintenance agreement in place for who's going to maintain them. So it is absolutely, I guess that's just my fun fact, but I mean that in general, if you don't maintain something or that hasn't been thought through when it was built, and I'm not saying it was anybody, it happened, right? There was a very complex series of decisions that got there, right? But that's how we tend to operate. And also, I would say in general, for folks that are putting together bike infrastructure, the magic number for maintaining snow in Colorado is 7 feet. Anything wider than that, you're going to have a car driving in it. Anything narrower than that might be difficult to plow. So we tend to shoot for facilities that are 7 feet wide.
Great. Yeah, very interesting stories there. Anything else anyone wanted to add in before closing up here then? All right. Well, I may just ask one follow-up question overall and just see if there's anything that inspires you or a community or a project that you've seen either employed or deployed somewhere else that you'd really like to see come to your community. If you, maybe it's like a wish list, if you will.
So in our grant program, we awarded a grant to an organization based in Durango called Core, and they developed a project in Cortez, and it's really cool. It's an e-bike program for people who are 65 and older. So they found a bunch of people in Cortez that were over 65 and really wanted to ride e-bikes. So they just gave them out about a month ago, and I've never seen people so happy and so excited to be out there riding their brand new e-bike. They are just having the best time over there. And it's just a great project. They took a unique approach, I thought, by just picking a very targeted audience and of participants. And I would just love to see something like that in more places replicated for sure.
I'd really love to see some protected intersections in the city of Fort Collins and more protected roundabouts. I don't think we have any technically protected, like Dutch-style roundabouts, but hopefully we have some of those coming in the future. And I think something that really just inspires me is that, I think that a lot of us probably grew up our kids now probably can't really ride their bikes comfortably to school. And I think that someday it'd be nice if we had infrastructure that supported that again.
I guess given the 1 minute left, I would kind of riff on what Sarah was mentioning about I know Lakewood is a shameless plug here. They have a similar program to Cortez called Cycling Beyond Ages. And that is a program where folks can sign up to take folks out that are in a senior community and take them for a ride on an e-tricycle. And people that have not been out for many weeks are very thrilled to be outside and riding in an e-tricycle. So I know that's not Lakewood's only program. It's a national program, but I guess that would be my wish for Boulder, that there would be a program like that in town.
Great. Well, I hope that kind of thought makes you all think about different ways to get around town, what the future of mobility could look like. I want to thank our panelists today for joining and sharing their knowledge and expertise. And also thank you all for joining us today.